an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Well, here we go. We're all ready to go on the ledge for October the 10th as we record this, and we are looking at a long holiday weekend in this part of the world, and I think we're probably all ready and set to go on that. And there was a little bit of a nip in the air this morning, so it's feeling like autumn, and that means that the legislature is getting back into business, and so happy to invite back Kathleen Wynne is here this morning. And let's see, who else have we got in the room? John Wright is with us. Keith Leslie's here, all set to go. Tim Hudak sends his regrets. I think he's talking to the police association. I don't know whether handcuffs are involved or what's going on there, but we seem to be in good shape. Just as a note off the top here, the first show we did a couple of weeks ago with this crew, the response I got back was, above all else, was it was refreshing to hear people be able to reasonably disagree. So I think we hit the right tone there. So it's all been good. A couple of weeks off, lots going on, and I think one of the things we want to get to the conversation around the Science Center and the Nobel laureate, weighing in on that. The RCMP investigation appears to be underway, or there's some momentum there, based on reporting at the Toronto Star. But two things I really want to get to, and they begin with our friends at Newstalk 1010. They broke the story, they didn't break the story. They broke it open. Let's put it that way. Yesterday, the mayor, Olivia Chow, here in Toronto, was on John Moore's show, and having to answer for a couple of missteps, which I think turning into a rather rough week. She was asked why she did not attend the October 7th memorial here in Toronto.
I really regret not being able to be there. I mourned with the Jewish community of the tragic loss of lives and the horrific things that Hamas did. I don't need to my office said, and they even went to the IT staff to look at the inbox. They didn't find it, and etc. I was wondering whether it got spammed or whatever. And anyway, it doesn't matter. You're absolutely right. I should have been there. I got caught up in the long discussion on Pike Lanes over at Kingsway area, where the emotions were very high, and the meeting went quite long.
Right.
And by the time I was done, I was exhausted. So I could have made phone calls and may have made it. I didn't even know precisely what time the event was, but it was dark.
Do you feel then that you have been let down by your staff? I don't think you're one of those people who yells behind closed doors, but I mean, does somebody's head need to roll?
John, it's not, blaming doesn't work for me. I much rather go forward.
Well, I'm sure that's the case. Much rather go forward, but John, just the halted, stilted, sort of grasping for a thought, and I think I'm being kind in that answer, suggests a whole lot of problems in her office to me. That is, she was not ready for that question. And drawing back the curtain, I know John Moore well enough to know that he wasn't going to go in there and do a gotcha on her. And I heard today, he warned her before she sat down, this is going to be a difficult conversation that we're going to have, and difficult in John Moore terms. So you knew that John was going to ask the question. Surely her office knew what was going on. Just give me your response to that.
Well, of course they knew what was going on, and she did too. I think there's two ways to look at this. The first thing is, of course, there will be those who insinuate that her backers, the people who have supported the mayor, in fact, are more supportive of the Palestinian side than they are of the Israeli side. You know, we've had other controversies about not having certain flags raised at City Hall. There's that, and also about the police situation, which came at the same time, where we had an officer who was shot, and the new police union president went after her as well for not speaking out and supporting, the police officer or the family. So there's this insinuation that she's carrying, and that is that she's made this a political issue because her supporters have made it a political issue. So I think that she knew exactly where the invitation was. I'm going to guess that if John Tory simply called to find out where she, in fact, where he could go and have a meeting with these folks, she could have done the same. I think the second thing to look at, though, is we're at a bit of a turning point, I think, and that is that where the vacuum exists in this city and in the country as a whole is that there's not the denunciation of the violence and the intimidation that's taking place on the street. I actually think that that's where this issue now is, as opposed to the more partisan issue of what side you take. And that is where the mayor has also left herself incredibly open, because it's affected communities. and Pierre Poilievre, I think, is filling part of that void, as he did at the reception the other night that he had in Ottawa with the Jewish community. There's something else going on below the surface where the intimidation is not being called out, as opposed to taking a side on something.
Yeah, well, and Keith, we know that anytime we talk about the Middle East, we talk about what's going on vis-a-vis Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Hamas, any of that. It's fraught with danger in terms of the politics of it. You are never on, and I say this with all due respect, you're never on the right side of the conversation. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to folks on Now and Next about the pager attack against Hamas and Hezbollah, rather. And, I just expressed the idea that attack, the specifics of the planning and the technology and the years of, getting into the supply chain, all that would have taken incredible resources. And I found that action frightening. And just by saying that, because we have elevated the battle to that level, just by saying that, I was in favor of terrorists, right? So you can't, you never land on the right place here. So back to the mayor sitting down with John Moore. I don't know that there's an excuse for this. I can't find that there would be an excuse for this. Spam doesn't do it. I checked with my IT people. That doesn't make any sense. To John's point, I heard Tory on the radio too saying, hey, I just picked up the phone and asked them when the event was.
That was weak. That was just so weak for her to be fumbling around like that and not to be prepared for him to ask that question. She should have had something absolutely ready. Something along the lines of, well, we all know I'm a New Democrat, and the New Democrats have been on the side of Palestine and Palestinians. That's a matter of policy for many, many years. And so her core supporters are absolutely more on the Palestinian side. She ducked away from this. I mean, it seems pretty obvious. But to your point, just as you say, Dave, just raising an opinion on this at all, I can't even remember what the topic was, but I once asked Dalton McGuinty a question, and he just returned me and he quoted Bill Davis saying, the Premier of the province of Ontario does not need to have an opinion on every topic. I asked him if he'd like to quote other Tory premiers, and he didn't. But the idea is, to your point, you really can't comment on this issue one way or the other without you're all of a sudden a terrorist, or you're sympathizing with terrorists, or you want to deport everybody. I mean, there's just no common middle ground. As we got a bit of praise for disagreeing politely on our podcast last time. Well, there's no disagreeing politely on this issue. No one wants to listen to the other side. No, I don't even want to hear your arguments. It's just everyone is just so deeply entrenched. I used to think abortion was the only issue like that, but people's minds can actually be changed on abortion. I don't think people's minds can be changed in this issue. And she walked right into that. And her staff, not to have her prepared with some sort of reasonable answer, but maybe it went to spam. Who the hell is buying that? Nobody.
Well, Kathleen Wynne, you are known for a lot of things, and not the least of which is having a firm handle on your files. I mean, there was nobody who knew the files better than you did, and I know that tested guys like Keith at the park and everybody else on as we went through this. I realize that there's this sort of kinship here in terms of you and the mayor, etc. But just put your hat on for a second as the comms person and tell me what happened there, because as Keith points out, this is fraught with danger to begin with. To walk into that and not attend for whatever lame excuse, and I'll use that phrase, even makes it worse.
Yeah, what I, as if I put myself in the mayor's shoes, even just, reflecting on my own experiences. Now, I wasn't in this exact situation, but there were lots and lots of times, particularly in my riding, where there were people at odds with one another, and I had to make decisions about where I was going to go. And my principle has always been that I'm going to stand with all of my constituents. So, that meant that I wasn't going to pick sides in conflicts. I wasn't going to only attend one group's events. I was going to try to understand where people on both sides of conflicts were coming from. And, I don't understand. I don't understand how this happened. I don't understand if the decision was made for the mayor not to go to the vigil. I don't understand that, because I think that it would have been the right thing to do to go. And if there were going to be vigils and events for other groups, obviously, then I think those should have been attended as well. But in terms of the communications on this, it's just a mess. I mean, I don't think anything that the mayor said about what happened is plausible. And so that's a real problem for her. And it's a problem. It does signal a problem in the office in terms of communications. And that's worrisome, because it means that, she's flying a bit without a net. And that's not okay, because we want the mayor of the city to be able to tell it like it is, be straightforward with people, and talk about what's really going on. And that's not what happened yesterday. So it's a real problem.
But it's not just yesterday, though, right? I mean, to be kind, this has been going on for at least a year. I mean, the whole fiasco around the vacancy tax and all that sort of thing. And it was, I didn't know anything about this. My staff screwed it up. So there were hints of this problem in the past. There's been change in that office, in the comms office. So is that a staff problem, or is that a mayor who's not listening to staff?
Well, I'd say there's a difference between the two, actually, Dave. The issue around the vacancy tax, yeah, I mean, I'm not making excuses for the communication of that was a problem. But this October 7th issue is such a highly sensitive, emotional issue, and a highly political issue. Not in terms of the geopolitics, but in terms of the local politics. So I'm actually way more surprised that this one was messed up than I was the other, because, I can almost see a scenario, and I don't know whether Keith agrees with me, but there are, the machinations of government can be problematic, and there are things that you might not know, and that can be problematic, obviously, when you have to explain them. But this one, I mean, I just don't believe that there wasn't a conversation in the mayor's office about what was going to happen on October 7th. And if that was the case, then why weren't they more prepared? So I'm going to separate them, Dave. I'm going to give them the credit, give them the benefit of the doubt in terms of the other issues. But this one, I think, was a real mess.
Can I just take issue with the press gallery at City Hall as well, Keith, and I don't know how much you'd sort of sniffed around and dug in on the story. With the exception of the mayor showing up on John Moore's show on Newstalk 1010, there was no question for her outside of that studio that I could find yesterday. Period. There was a statement from the mayor. There was a written statement that was read by reporters, etc. But nobody, or she did not make herself available, it cuts either way, to stand in front of microphones and say, hey, this is what happened. I mean, I get that, good on John for having the exclusive tape. But shouldn't that have kind of been the next step?
Well, I would imagine that she did not make herself available, or else the City Hall press gallery would absolutely have been asking her, where the heck were you? And why were you there? And asking all the very obvious questions about this one. As Kathleen said, October the 7th, we knew it was coming up. Everyone knew it was going to be, fraught with emotion, and that they would expect the mayor to attend. That's just a given, I think, that most Torontonians would expect the mayor to have been at an October 7th rally, regardless of which side. And as Kathleen said, if there's another opposing one or another opinion, you can attend that one as well. But at this point, I'm usually up for blaming the media, quite frankly, especially since I no longer full-time report. But I don't think it's necessarily their fault on this one. I think anytime she would have been, John just would happen to be the first one to get access to her. And again, putting out a statement that was just so weak and so lame, that's not going to cut it. I think the reporters would absolutely have pushed for her had they had the accessibility. And if they if they did have the access to her and didn't ask that question, I'd be really wondering why. But I just can't imagine that they did have access.
Well, one issue in a week or 10 days is problematic. John, you've already referred to the second issue, and that came up on John's show again yesterday, but it came up earlier. Warmington was reporting on it, and this is around the shooting of a police officer, an undercover police officer, in a nice neighborhood in Toronto. And I think that's why, for a number of reasons, it got so much attention. We're always going to pay attention to when a police officer is injured in the line of duty, let alone shot. But again, asked why she didn't visit the officer at the hospital. The police association, as you said, John, took umbrage with the fact that she failed to show up. John Moore asked the mayor, why did she regret not showing up?
Toronto Police Association and many rank and file unhappy you didn't go to Sunnybrook Hospital when a police officer was shot. Do you regret that?
No, because on that day I was representing the city, saying goodbye. It was a big event for the fire chief. Yeah. And I immediately called the chief of police. We put out a statement. And it just, I can't, in the middle of, say, the fire chief that have done such incredible work. He put like 34 years award-winning fire chief that I can't, in the middle of his event, before he speak, I get up. And he didn't speak till 10:30. So by the time I finished that night, it was 11:30. So I couldn't make it. I did ask, and I did put in writing to the chief of police that, is there something I can do? Should I send flowers or bring, do something? He didn't say that I should. But it wasn't physically possible. And I did call, and we text each other that evening.
A little bit better with the answer, John, but still, I mean, right off the top saying, no, I don't regret not going. And how could I possibly do that when I was saying goodbye to a long-term public servant?
Again, this goes to the the motivation of politics. And, again, I go back to the insinuation that there's a political platform that is being exercised here, as opposed to being more, I would say the word gracious and calling out indignities to people or the hurt to families or individuals. So I think we're going to see the tone change, but I think the mayor is expressing what her political base thinks and does. The second thing I'd add to that, though, is I've just finished doing polling that's been released over the last couple of weeks in Edmonton, Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto. And one of those polls looked at the re-electability of all the mayors and their approval ratings and the issues within those cities. And the mayor of Toronto has the highest level of approval rating out of all four of those cities by a long shot. She's holding at least, I would say, on almost any issue between 40 and 53% support. And so I don't mean to get really cynical with all of this, is she's representing a certain point of view because it's got her where she is. And it is, in fact, the base that continues to support her, even after the highest tax increase that this city's known in some time. So she may be playing it wrong on some of these levels, but to her, she's playing it right. And I don't believe in any way, shape, or form. Look, I know someone close to me who's an executive assistant to a cabinet minister. And I know that it's on their radar to know exactly what days and where that minister is going to step into and making sure that there's a full briefing on it. She knew, they knew it was a political decision in my sense, but she's not suffering at the polls yet in terms of her own electability.
Well, if it were a one-off, Kathleen, I get that, okay, there could have been an issue here, but you start to layer these things on within a 10-day period. And, I know a week in politics is a lifetime, and we'll get into another week next week. But, well, let me put it to you. If someone had come to you and whispered in your ear during the course of an event where you were saying goodbye to a longtime public servant, there's a police officer who's been shot, he's in the hospital, would they say you should go, or do you want to go?
They might say either. And I think I thought her answer on this one was actually fine, but I would have added to it. I immediately asked my deputy mayor to go. I think that there's an absolutely appropriate role for a designated representative to appear in situations like that. So I'm not quite sure why that didn't happen. I mean, maybe it did. She just didn't make it part of her answer. But I don't think she could get up and leave in a situation like that. That's very, very awkward. It would have been noticed. Nobody would have known why she was doing it. It's really a problem. So I would have, what I would have done is, can you make sure that, in my case, Deb Matthews goes, my designated deputy.
Well, Keith, as John has often said, if you're explaining, you're losing. So I think in that case, though, it might have been easier to explain. Yes, Deputy Mayor McKelvey is in the room here saying goodbye to the fire chief. I went to the hospital to see the cop. I just think that's a better explanation.
Well, there's no time limit on these things, is there? So quite frankly, if she was leaving, I know 11:30 is a late night. I know politicians really put in the long hours. Anytime people criticize politicians, I don't accept. They are hardworking people. I still would have had the driver take her over to the hospital at 11:30. She wouldn't have to stay there long. The point is, the mayor showed up. The cops would have known that. They would have told each other she was here. She came to see. That's all it takes. It wouldn't have added, probably another half hour max to her day, and it would have made all the difference instead of this, again, as you say, being another one of just getting added cumulative to the things she's doing that some people don't like. This was an easy one. She could have easily just gone, or as Kathleen said, sent a deputy, but I don't even think the deputy was necessary in this case. Just go at 11:30. The cops would have been still in the hospital, in force, looking out for their buddy, their colleague. They would have all been there. They would have seen the mayor come in. To Kathleen's point, she could have announced something at the fire chief's thing and said, I'm sorry, there's a police officer been shot, had someone announce it, and that's why the mayor's leaving. Just that simple announcement, people would have understood absolutely. Or I said the simple thing, just if you're out of there at 11:30, I know it's late, go to the hospital at midnight. That would even add more credibility or more weight to what she's doing and making the appearance. It would have garnered her a lot of easy points, a lot of easy likes, as they say, as opposed to all this negative publicity over something that she could easily have taken care of.
That's a really good point, Keith. I think that is very wise. You should be a political advisor, because that actually is something that might have been suggested, and it is something that that would have made this a complete non-issue. Yeah.
Well, then let me ask you this, because you've been on the receiving end of that kind of, criticism, even into vitriol, in terms of, okay, you should just resign. You're not suited for the job. When you think you've done the right thing, you think you were in the right place, you're on the side of the angels on whatever decision you made, and still the next morning you got guys like me and the trolls on Twitter saying it's time for you to walk out the door. We've had enough of you. But put me in that chair.
How long have we got? One of the things we're talking about this morning is the ability to defend or explain your actions, right? And I really feel, and I don't know, Keith has a better view of this than I, because I was in my own skin doing it. But I always felt that if I had done everything in my power to do the right thing, then I could with confidence talk about my decision. What's worrisome, I think, in a couple of these situations, particularly the October 7th one, is I'm not sure that that confidence that she's done everything she could, or that there is a rational explanation, is coming through. So, I mean, at some point, Dave, you just have to say, well, fine. I mean, I've done the best I could, and I spent at least a year at the end of my time as premier saying, look, this is the work I'm doing. I'm continuing to do it. And the reporters just kept saying, what's it like to have people hate you so much? I mean, that was the conversation in the scrums. So from my perspective, I had to just be able to say, I've done everything I can. I've done what I said I was going to do. And people will make their judgments as they choose. But I had to have that confidence that I had done absolutely everything in my power to show up, to do the things that people expected me to do, and to be there for them.
So then you'll be entirely empathetic when we start to talk about the RCMP investigation into the Greenbelt. On the one hand, there is the process, there are the good legal questions around this. Rob Benzie writing in the Star this week that it appears that the investigation is underway. He's not really telling us a whole lot more about who is being questioned in the investigation, but the premier has done a pretty good job so far in the last year saying, listen, I've told you we're being transparent. We've moved things forward. We're cooperating with the RCMP. Is that good enough, Kathleen?
Well, as you said, people are buying it. The RCMP is doing their job, and we just won't know, Dave, until they've finished doing their work. But Doug Ford is nothing if not confident. So he exudes that. What it's based in, the RCMP they'll have to tell us. I mean, I don't think we have anything like the whole story yet, but am I empathetic in terms of what's going on in that office and all of the staff who have been questioned or who are waiting to be questioned, and the anxiety around that? Yeah, I have some empathy for that. Am I empathetic in terms of the premier's rhetoric around it? Not particularly, but he's at this point, he's able to convince people that his story is true, and we'll see.
Well, Keith, the idea that the investigation's going on, one of the things that really stuck out for me in Rob's reporting was that typically an investigation like this would take 1.5, a little bit more than 1.5 years to really kind of get its feet under it. So if you started a year ago, that puts us into early spring of 2025 before we might even know anything of the way this is going. Against the backdrop of all this conversation around an early election, that kind of shifts the ground, doesn't it?
Well, I would think completely. It's got to be the number one factor in their election timing planning right now. If they're going to go early and not stick to the fixed date in 2026, if they do want to go in 2025, I would think it would have to be, can you count on the Mounties taking 18 months? I mean, that's an about. It could be 16 months, so it could land in the middle of the campaign. And I think right now they're not expecting complete good news from the RCMP. They're not going to issue a report. It was all cool. The key question that Rob Benzie reported that the Mounties are asking the staff, and they seem to be focusing on the Premier's office, not so much the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Housing, where the Greenbelt fiasco sort of mainly took place, but they're going after people in the Premier's office, and they're asking the key question, which I think was fascinating, and Rob Benzie put this right at the top of his story, which is, where did the direction come from to remove those lands from the Greenbelt? And that's key. Did it come from the top, or did it come from someone pretending to be the top, which is what we've heard, pretending to have the Premier's authority to authorize these land removals or to pick the lands to be removed? It's fascinating right now. I think for the government, I don't know how they can be planning a spring 2025 election when this report from the Mounties is likely to come 6 months from now. unless they're really, really confident that they've done absolutely nothing wrong. And I don't think that level of confidence can exist because it appears they've done a lot of things wrong in this file, including playing favoritisms. Lands that were worth several millions of dollars all of a sudden became worth a couple of $1 billion with the overnight stroke of a pen by the government. So I think this is going to really, really hamper this government's ability to have a free reign with its planning for the election. They need to know where the Mounties are. And if they haven't actually started, asking the actual politicians yet, if they haven't questioned the premier yet, which apparently they have not, that means this has got some ways to go. And all of it just keeps hanging over the government's head. And the premier, part of this Greenbelt, after they reversed their decision and said they're going to do better, they announced they were going to set up this registry, this thing, so that lobbyists would have to. It was an additional level of scrutiny for lobbyists, who are trying to change government policy. We found out this week that the Ministry of Health, for 6 months since this registry was set up, didn't add anyone. We don't know who's been lobbying the government for the Ministry of Health, and we know that private sector companies are trying to get more and more and bigger slice of the healthcare delivery and healthcare services provided in Ontario. And it looks like this government is doing it, but they're not telling us who they're even meeting with. So for Ford to claim he's being transparent since the Greenbelt fiasco, absolutely not.
Well, John, again, we'll come back to this, and you always want to place this on the front porch. And so far, it doesn't matter what we kind of have thrown at the wall here, or the opposition has done. He's still riding high in the polls. He's comfortable and confident, as Kathleen points out. So, is this enough to shake anything that's going to, look like something that's going to be a crisis of confidence in this government? You're on mute.
What's going to shake it is, in fact, a good opposition to the government, which does not exist at the moment. We can talk about that in a little bit, but let me put this in perspective. When I was doing polling back in the days when Dalton McGuinty was premier, and this was not for the party or for the government, but just generally for my media partners, we always found the premier to be at about 33% in terms of vote, but his approval rating was running around 37 to 40%. Now, you need 37% in order to get a majority government. And my common phrase there was, during an election campaign, he has the opportunity to grow from where he sits into the vote level of that he has in approval. And I have to reflect on the fact that even after now almost 2 terms, that this premier is riding at the same approval level and vote level that he got when he first got elected, and the second time around. So one has to think that with all of the issues and all of the scandals and a whole series of other things, including, affordability, which is a big issue in a lot of the cities, and the controversial steps that have taken place with the Greenbelt, why isn't he sitting at 32%? Why isn't he sitting much lower and having to be in the same position where he's having to grow into a lead? Look, there's also a situation where Therma and Ontario Place and the Greenbelt are well outside the jurisdictions of people who live in the north and in the east and the west who give this government support. And they don't care what goes on in the city of Toronto. There's different priorities there. So, I mean, from a pure political point of view, we can say all we want about what the scandals might hold for them or where they may go or who's going to talk to whom or whether charges are going to be laid. But right now, I mean, there's no denying that the premier has staying power, and he's in a position that if there were an election tomorrow without a strong opposition, he's going to capture another massive majority government. So I think when you just look at the numbers after all this period of time, nothing yet has really stuck to this government.
So Kathleen, when we kind of take that stance on it in terms of, it doesn't matter what you throw at the wall, it's not going to stick. I mean, we can go back to, the gas plants, and there was an investigation, and the Liberals survived and actually formed a government after that. So is this something that's going on in a war room that says, listen, we've got to be focused on something else? And I speak directly to the opposition because they're banging on that wall, banging on that door, but they don't seem to be getting any results from it.
No, and I think Ford has been successful in distracting people from, all of these really serious issues. We talked about, we collectively have talked about digging a tunnel under the 401, and the whole point of that announcement was to get people talking about it and not thinking about other things. it's really hard. It's really hard for me to maintain my nonpartisan sort of moderate approach in this conversation, because I think that the fact that Ford is confident about what he's saying to people, the fact that he is a hail fellow, well met kind of guy, that takes him a long way. It doesn't mean he's governing well. It doesn't mean that the right decisions are being made in education or in healthcare or even in infrastructure, you know? So I think there are lots of bad things that are going on in this province. Whether the Greenbelt issue is one that will bring him down, probably not. It really does depend what the RCMP finds, I think. But even then, obviously there's information that they have, because to Keith's point, they seem to be heading for an early election next year. So whether their lawyers are saying it's going to take longer than next spring and you've got time, you can go, or they're just confident that the RCMP is not going to find anything. I don't know, but for sure, this government has been very successful in distracting people from the really bad decisions that have been made in some of the major institutions that we pride ourselves on in this province.
Okay, maybe. And I think a part of that is, let's go back to COVID, and Andrea Horwath had the opportunity to sort of step out and challenge the premier. Wasn't able to do that there. And I get that, a lot of the media oxygen, all of it, in fact, was taken up by COVID. But there was a missed opportunity for the NDP as the official opposition over a number of years, and I think still, to actually grab the agenda. Merritt Stiles has been in the job for just over a year. Bonnie Crombie announcing about a year ago that she wanted the job as the Liberal leader. Between the two of them, I don't think there has been enough media that they have been able to garner or create that would have fit into maybe the 3-day agenda for Doug Ford in the last couple of weeks. So it's not just about the distraction. I don't think that the opposition parties, Kathleen, have shown any strength, momentum, or traction at all in helping us get to know them better, because that's pretty much what they've got to do, no?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Although I will say that the opposition, both the Liberals and, well, quite frankly, the Greens, the Liberals, and the NDP were on the Greenbelt issue pretty hard, and that led to a lot of community organizing, and the two fed on each other. I'm in Simcoe County. There were protests in Simcoe County, which is a very blue part of the province, about the Greenbelt. So I think there was some effective opposition there, but I'm not going to argue that the NDP has been an effective opposition. I think that's been the case since 2018 under Andrea and then under Merritt. I think Bonnie is new and she doesn't have a seat in the legislature, and I think that's been a problem for the Libs to this point. We'll see what happens as we get closer to an election, but yeah, there's not been a strong opposition at Queen's Park, and Ford's gotten away with a ton. That is true.
Dave, I want to jump in here and just frame up something about the Liberals. What strikes me is that in past circumstances, while we're not in a campaign, when you're in this period of time, I think it's incumbent to what I would call change the channel and turn up the volume. If you're going to go head to head with somebody who's already painted your wagon as somebody who's just going to raise taxes, you don't want to have a debate on that issue. You also don't want to have a debate on affordability, because it can come back to a whole series of other things that are on the conservative agenda. But you can have an off-campaign theme that can play into it. And this is where I think the Liberals have missed it so far. You can start talking about coming clean. A lot of the issues that you've just talked about and that we've dealt with over the last period of time have been on sole source contracts, or they've been behind the scenes deals that are going on. there's another platform that hasn't been built here for the Liberals to effectively put in to start talking about these things. And I did go on the record some months ago with saying I think she should have taken, Bonnie Crombie should have taken that shot at Milton, and it was a close race anyways. But you do need to be in the House. You can't always just be out in the wilderness and hoping that someone's going to cover you. But I think it's the apparatus of the Liberal machine right now that doesn't seem to be producing something that's counteracting that. They've got the teachers on board now. There's stakeholders who are coming inside the tent that were outside of the tent after their recent meeting. But there's something missing here where there's no thematic talking point that can bridge them into the next election. And I think that that's something that, you know, allows the premier and his party to just have a free breakaway on the St. Lawrence, right? Like it's just they are out there. So there's something else not being played here where, as I said, you'd want to change the channel and turn up the volume on your terms as opposed to fighting on their turf.
Well, I want to get Kathleen's take on that, but Keith, the one thing that strikes me about this, and I heard this recently at an event I was at, and it was some Queen's Park reporters and so on who were there, and the thinking is that, yes, to John's point, that, you know, there isn't kind of this vision out there that they're actually creating or you know, wind under their wings politically providing. But they don't have a Nick Kouvalis in their corner. They don't have the bench strength, the actual backbone of the support they need to get out there and do what they need to do. It's easy for, you know, the unwashed just to say, you know, everything that's going to happen is going to happen because Bonnie Crombie or Merritt Stiles is going to get out there and do that kind of job. But you need the backroom support. You need the war room support. And the sense was that I got from my conversations is certainly the Liberals just don't have that right now.
Their ground game is not what it once was. That's all there is to it. I mean, they just don't have the number of volunteers and supporters out there to do all these sorts of things that they need to have doing. As you say, and some high profile like a Kouvalis that can just sort of drive them, even prod them into some public campaigns to get going, to pick some issues to be strong on. Bonnie Crombie emerged from the Witness Protection Program one day this week and put out a news release the next day and said, yesterday, I went to see the nursing program at Seneca. Good. How on earth is that going to get you any media? At least if you put it out beforehand, you might get a reporter or two come along. Probably not, but you might. But putting something out that has no issue to it, no theme to it, it's just a random news release, she's just not there. To Kathleen's point about her not having a seat in the legislature, there was always that debate. Should you, as a new leader, or should you be out introducing yourself to the province? Well, when the government is going to take a 19, 20-week break from the legislature, you're not really hampering yourself from doing both. You could have run for a seat either in Milton or in Mississauga. Pick one now. They're nominating candidates now. She still hasn't picked the Mississauga Centre riding that we know she wants to run in. Why are they so quiet? The NDP as well, they seem to have, they're trying a new relaunch campaign to reintroduce Merritt Stiles to people. She is a strong opposition leader, but they've fallen to their traditional 20% third place position, even as the official opposition. Even though the Liberals have so few seats in the legislature, they're actually polling stronger than the NDP. And when we saw in the Belleville by-election, the Liberals finished second, the NDP dropped down below 20%. So we have no effective coordinated opposition. We have two opposition parties with many of the same issues. And we see a lot of Ontarians, a lot of people who are interested in politics advocating for something like we saw in France. Can't these, parties get together on the left or on the center left and agree not to nominate candidates against each other? That's not going to happen. They are going to still run full slates of candidates if they can nominate all 124 for the Liberals. It'll be tough. But they are going to run. So it's going to be the left dividing the vote again. And Ford's going to, as John says, if that keeps happening, 37% gets him back as majority government. And right now, I don't think he's fallen below 37% of the party as a whole in their popularity, at least not in some time.
Well, let me just say, maybe. I mean, you guys were all saying I couldn't win in 2014. You all said I didn't have a shot. We won in 2014. Bonnie's out there working with people, talking to people. There were 1,000 people at the AGM. A lot of them young people. There were a lot of young people there, which gave me a lot of hope about where we're going, because it wasn't the same old. There were kids from Sudbury. There were kids from all over the province. So those are the people we need to build the party. Some of them will be candidates. Some of them Some of them will be the boots on the ground, you know? And so, yeah, so the campaign hasn't gelled yet. Well, that's probably a good thing because you know, you want to make sure that you're ready when the election campaign really starts. So I think that there are good people advising Bonnie. I'm not part of that. You know, I'm not obviously part of that back room, but I know that there are strong people who've got good experience in the party and in Ontario politics talking to her. It doesn't bother me at all that we don't have Nick Kouvalis, quite frankly. You know,
really,
if I may say. So I think just watch her. I think one thing about Bonnie is people really don't know her yet. I mean, her story is a really good one, you know, in terms of having, she's fought for every single thing she's won in life. You know, she was raised by a single mom. She was not born with a silver spoon in her mouth in any way. And she knows how to bring people around her, and she knows how to succeed. So stay tuned, guys. We'll see.
All right. So what we'll do is I think next week we'll want to kind of set the table for the opening of the legislature. It'll be the one show prior to them all getting back in their seats. And, you know, I think we want to get into that. What do we need to see from all four parties in the legislature between now and, you know, the end of the calendar year? Because I think, you know, if we're thinking about an election coming up, that next 8 to 12 weeks is really going to be kind of critical in terms of where they go, all four parties, in terms of where they go vis-a-vis a campaign. So we'll leave it there. Kathleen Wynne, Keith Leslie, John Wright, thanks for being here. It's just been fun again.
Great to be with you.
Pleasure, guys.
All right, and that'll do it for us here on The Ledge. And by the way, if you can hit the subscribe button. I'm new to this YouTube thing, so if you hit the subscribe button on YouTube, this is great because when there's a new show, it pops up and you get a notification and all that kind of thing. So, and what I'm learning is that more people now are coming to the show because they only listen to their podcasts on the YouTube. So if you're here on YouTube with us, thanks. If you're still on Spotify and Apple, thanks for being there. There's a few hundred episodes of the show, in fact, if you want to go back and have a listen to how the program has evolved. By the way, Now and Next this week features our comms strategy team, Anne-Marie Aikens, Bob Reed, Brad Ross, and Lindsay Broadhead. And I picked their communication brains on the Kamala Harris media strategy this week. And it was really interesting to hear what they had to say about the Harris campaign getting out in front of what you might otherwise call unconventional, certainly not all legacy media, to reveal herself to the American public. And, of course, that's critical less than a month away from the presidential election in the United States. All right, that'll do it. Do enjoy your long holiday weekend. Happy Thanksgiving. And thanks for joining us here on Now and Next for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.